So we picked the picture up in September 1982 now. HCDO 40410. This is a meeting of the Haemophilia Reference Centre directors on the 6th of September 1982. And it's the first reference in any of their meetings to the question of AIDS. If we could go, please, Paul, to page 11. We'll see the second paragraph, and this is how it comes up. Professor Bloom asked Dr. Krask if he had any information about the acquired immune deficiency syndrome following reports in the United States and the possible relationship of this syndrome with blood products and hepatitis. Dr. Krask said he would find out more about this and agreed to try and have some information available for the Haemophilia Centre directors at the Manchester meeting. That Manchester meeting took place a week later at CBLA 301619. So we can see this is the bigger meeting involving all of the Haemophilia Centre directors and not just the directors of the reference centres, 13th of September 1982. And if you could go, please, Paul, to page 10. We will see Dr. Krask's report back at the bottom of the page, the acquired immune deficiency syndrome. The reference centre directors had asked Dr. Krask to look into the report from the United States of this syndrome, mainly in homosexuals, but including 3 haemophiliacs. It appeared that there was a remote possibility that commercial blood products had been involved. Dr. Krask asked the directors to let him know if they had any cases of the syndrome. The working party, that's the hepatitis working party of the Haemophilia Centre Directors Organisation, was considering the implications of the reports in the USA. And so obviously one of the many issues that you will have to consider in due course about the response of haemophilia directors is whether this was at this stage a sufficiently urgent and accurate appreciation, this characterisation of a remote possibility of the involvement of commercial blood products. Paul, could we have OXUH 302848, please? This is a further MMWR report from CDC, 24th of September 1982. It includes now a case definition for AIDS, but for present purposes, if we could just look at the third page, please, Paul. First main paragraph, 2 points in this update deserve emphasis. First, the eventual case mortality rate of AIDS a few years after diagnosis may be far greater than the 41% overall case mortality rate noted above. So I just draw attention to that, sir, to indicate that at this stage, one thing that was seemingly apparent was the very high mortality rate from AIDS. Paul, could we next have, please, MDIA 5010? MDIA 5010. So we're now in the mainstream media. This is, rather than scientific journals or medical journals, this is The Observer, 14th of November 1982. No defence against gay disease is the heading. If we look, it's quite small print in the fourth column, please, Paul. Top half of the page, fourth column. AIDS is not infectious, though, as colds and measles might be. Close relatives and friends do not catch it. A major speculation is that the AIDS virus is carried in the blood and transmitted directly either sexually or through syringes, which is how hepatitis B, to which homosexuals are also prone, spreads. This link with hepatitis might also explain the presence of AIDS amongst heterosexuals who inject drugs, etc., etc. This could also explain the presence of AIDS in a small group of heterosexual haemophiliacs who injected themselves frequently with a blood concentrate designed to encourage clotting. So the observer there reporting in November 1982 the potential connection between or the potential blood transmission route of the AIDS virus. Could we then please, Paul, have BAYP 5018_119? This is a newsletter from the American National Hemophilia Foundation. The date is December the 9th, 1982. It's concerned with AIDS update. In July of 1982, the CDC reported 3 cases of AIDS identified among Hemophilia A patients. Since then, none of these have survived. The following is a summary of a December 10, 1982 CDC update on AIDS. The CDC has confirmed 4 additional and 1 highly suspect case among Hemophilia A patients. There's reference to there being no suggestion of the haemophiliacs acquiring the disease through contact with each other or other groups known to be at increased risk. The MMWR points out that all of these cases have been exposed to factor VIII concentrates, and all but 1 have also received other blood components. And then, if we go to the next page, please, Paul. CDC recommends that patients should be advised of this risk. And then, last 2 paragraphs, it's important to note that while there is insufficient data to directly link the spread of AIDS to concentrate, there is an increased concern that AIDS may be transmitted through blood products. It is the NHF's point of view that patients and parents should be aware of the potential risks. And then it's suggested if you have any questions, they should be directed to the treating clinician. So that's the advice emanating from the States in December of 1982. If we then, please, Paul, go to PRSE 303276. And if we could go, please, to page 4. This is 10th of December 1992, MMWR. This is the report of what's referred to elsewhere as the San Francisco baby case. Sir, possible transfusion-associated acquired immunodeficiency syndrome, California. CDC has received a report of a 20-month-old infant from the San Francisco area who developed unexplained cellular immunodeficiency and opportunistic infection. This occurred after multiple transfusions, including a transfusion of platelets derived from the blood of a male subsequently found to have AIDS. And if we go to the next page, please, Paul. Editorial note just over halfway down the page. The etiology of AIDS remains unknown, but its reported occurrence amongst homosexual men, intravenous drug abusers, and persons with haemophilia A suggests it may be caused by an infectious agent transmitted sexually or through exposure to blood or blood products. If the infant's illness described in this report is AIDS, its occurrence following receipt of blood products from a known AIDS case adds support to the infectious agent hypothesis. And we see then, if we go to PRSE 302436, this is another newsletter from the National Haemophilia Foundation in the States, the date now December the 21st, 1982. If we go further down, we'll see in the second paragraph, there's an increased concern that AIDS may be transmitted through blood products. Patients and parents should be aware of the potential risks. There is no conclusive evidence that cryoprecipitate or fresh frozen plasma will reduce the risk of AIDS. We feel, however, that this is no time to introduce concentrates to patients who have never used them before, except when there is an overriding medical indication. And then examples of patients who should not be introduced to concentrates at this time are newborn infants through age 4, newly diagnosed cases of haemophilia, and those with mild disease. And then it continues, at this time, the NHF AIDS Task Force does not recommend a change in treatment to those who've received concentrates and therapy. And by all means, one should not withhold the use of clotting factor therapy when needed. If we then, please, Paul, have CGRA 40434. This is a Cutter memo, still in December 1982. This is the 29th of December 1982, so pharmaceutical company. It appears to me to be advisable to include an AIDS warning in our literature for factor 9 and factor 8. I realise that very little is known about AIDS and the relationship that products we manufacture have in causing the syndrome. However, litigation is inevitable, and we must demonstrate diligence in passing along whatever we do know to the physicians who prescribe the product. And then there are steps set out for inclusion in package insert, etc., once the wording is agreed. So we've looked at, there, what the Cutter is saying. We've looked at what the National Haemophilia Foundation in the States is saying. We're now going to look at the Domestic Haemophilia Society, the UK Haemophilia Society, its first bulletin of 1983. It's PRSE.
Well, before you go to 1983,
yes,
you mentioned a moment or two ago by reference to CBLA 301619, I think suggesting that Krask had made a report, and the conclusion was that it was a remote possibility that commercial blood products were involved, and you suggested I might have to resolve whether that was a sufficient response. I don't know if we have a copy of Paul, I beg your pardon, Paul, has a copy of BPLL 0011645.
I'm not sure that he will, sir.
Well, let me tell you what my note says. It will need to be checked. But I have a note that on the 5th of November, 1982, Krask wrote a memo in respect of AIDS. So this is only a
we do have it, sir, with a different reference. So we can CBLA 301653_003 is Dr. Krask on the 5th of November.
And I think he looks at the situation as possible cause. He puts forward 3 possible causes, and he discounts the first 2 causes. That's the use of amyl nitrate as a sexual heightener during homosexual intercourse, and the immunosuppressive effects of CMV, cytomegalovirus, which leaves only 1.
Yes, if we go to the next page, please, Paul, we can see. Yes, and it's put here by Dr. Krask, the association with sexual promiscuity, intravenous drug abuse, and possibly, again the word is possibility, the transfusion of commercial blood concentrates, together with evidence of clustering and a prodromal phase, suggest an infectious agent with a similar epidemiology to that of hepatitis B.
So
and then he
says... He discounts 2 and he's left with the infectious agent idea, doesn't he?
Yes. And then he says if 3 is the most likely cause, and then he talks about the possibility of it being present in plasma used to prepare hepatitis B vaccines.
And I think if you just scroll down to the end, yeah, I don't think there's anything else there.
No.
But it's at least it may set the record straight so far as he is concerned. Perhaps something I have to consider in any event.
Yes. So, Paul, if we have, please, now we're in early 1983, PRSE 0004120, please. This is a Haemophilia Society bulletin. We don't have the precise date, sir. It's the first bulletin that was published in 1983, and so the date it's been ascribed on our systems, on the chronology, is is effectively the 1st of January 1983. It almost certainly was later than that, but we don't know the precise date. If we could go to the the penultimate page, please, Paul. What we have towards the bottom right-hand corner is, if we scroll down, AIDS and Haemophilia, an interview with Dr. Peter Kernoff, Director of the Haemophilia Centre at the Royal Free Hospital in London. And then if we go to the next page, please, it's a written question and answer. I'll just refer to 3 of the questions and answers. What's the cause of AIDS? That's not known, but because there are similarities between the groups of people who seem to be getting AIDS and those who are known to be at risk of hepatitis B, it's been suggested that AIDS might be caused by an infectious agent, perhaps a virus, which is transmitted in the same way as hepatitis B. That is mainly by injected blood or blood products and sexual contact. However, this is just a guess, and there are several other possibilities. It doesn't set out what those possibilities are. Question, I begin to see links with haemophilia. Answer, yes, but they're very tenuous. Certainly we know that haemophiliacs are at higher than normal risk of getting hepatitis B because of their frequent exposure to infusions of blood products. If AIDS is caused by an infectious agent, and if this agent is transmitted by blood product infusion, and these are both big ifs, then it may be that haemophiliacs could be at increased risk of AIDS. And then the question, well, do haemophiliacs get AIDS? Amongst the group of patients with AIDS who have been reported to the American authorities, there have been 11 haemophiliacs. It's not entirely clear how many of these haemophiliacs had risk factors which were unrelated to their haemophilia. Pausing there, the information in the MMWRs doesn't suggest any association with any other risk factors in its report of cases. And then the question, could British haemophiliacs get AIDS? Of course it's possible, but I'd expect AIDS to remain a rare disease. The idea that there's an epidemic of AIDS amongst haemophiliacs is ludicrous, is his answer. Paul, if we could then have CGRA 40301, please. This is the 4th of January 1983. It's a report on a CDC multi-agency meeting, so it's again an American meeting. We go to the second page, the meeting that took place in Atlanta, and if we go down to the second half of the page, aspects of discussion, AIDS continues to be a major public health problem. In addition to the previously described high-risk groups, and those are then listed, persons with haemophilia are also at increased risk of developing AIDS, presumably by introduction of a transmissible agent in factor VIII concentrate. 5 cases of AIDS have been reported in persons with haemophilia since the 3 described in July, and 2 to 3 more are considered to be possible cases. 1 case of AIDS has occurred in an infant who received a platelet transfusion from a man who subsequently was diagnosed as an AIDS patient. That's probably a reference to the San Francisco baby case. Several other AIDS cases under investigation, 5, have no risk factors but have received blood products within the past 2 years. Some participants were reluctant to accept the hypothesis that AIDS has been transmitted by whole blood in the absence of additional evidence. So that's the CDC meeting in January 1983. And then if we could please, Paul, have RLIT 40233. This is a publication in Science Journal, 7th of January 1983, Spread of AIDS Sparks New Health Concern. Picking it up in the left-hand column, the relentless new disease called AIDS continues to spread, reference to certain data. And then the second paragraph says this: moreover, blood products have come under increased suspicion as vehicles for spreading AIDS. An infant who received several infusions of whole blood and blood products developed the condition. One of the donors, who'd appeared well at the time he gave blood, eventually died of the disease. The CDC also reports the diagnosis of AIDS in 4 haemophiliacs, in addition to the 3 previously identified, confirming earlier suggestions that these individuals might be at high risk. And we see here the comment from CDC, perhaps in contrast to Dr. Kernoff's comment. The problem in haemophiliacs is real, says the CDC's Harold Jaff. it isn't going to go away. The latest reports support the hypothesis that AIDS is caused by an infectious agent, possibly a virus, that can be transmitted by close contact, including that between family members, or by blood products. The latter possibility raises a serious health issue about the safety of the blood products used by haemophiliacs and perhaps by the general public. And then, if we could, Paul, go to PRSE 302410. We're here in the New England Journal of Medicine, the 13th of January 1983. The article is entitled AIDS and Preventive Treatment in Haemophilia. And if we could go to the second page, please, Paul, to the last paragraph. The fact that haemophiliacs are at risk for AIDS is becoming clear. If the use of cryoprecipitates will minimise this risk, the current home infusion programme needs to be revised. And then there's reference to the studies, but there being small studies. Unfortunately, the data are consistent with a greater potential for AIDS in the population treated with concentrates. Physicians involved in the care of haemophiliacs must now be alert to this risk. Preventing the complications of the present treatment may have to take precedence over preventing the complications of haemophilia itself. And then, Paul, if we could have DHSC 0002223_085. Do you have that? DHSC 0002223_085. Maybe give me the wrong reference before. Thank you. So we're again back into the mainstream media, The Observer, the 16th of January 1983, mystery disease threat. A commercial blood product imported into Britain from the US may pose a grave threat to the health of haemophiliacs who inject it to encourage clotting. We skip a paragraph. Officials at the Government Centre for Disease Control in Atlanta, Georgia, have described the spread of the disease as an impending epidemic among haemophiliacs. And then the second right-hand column, second paragraph, a few lines down. In the past 10 months, the disease has spread from the homosexual community to include haemophiliacs, and various others listed. The cause remains baffling. One theory is that an infectious agent is transmitted directly, either sexually or through contaminated blood products, in a similar manner to hepatitis B, to which homosexuals and haemophiliacs are also prone. And then if we just scroll out, please, so we see the whole document, Paul. We can see from the handwritten notes at the top of the page that this is a document that came to the attention of the Department of Health and Social Security, because there's a note to Dr. Wolford saying to her it would be useful to know the outcome of Haemophilia Centre Directors meeting. Perhaps we can discuss at an opportune moment. And she says she's written to Professor Bloom for details of the meeting. And we may look at that correspondence tomorrow when we look at Professor Bloom. So that's 16th of January 1983. We then, please, Paul, could we have SBTS 40315021? This is an article, doesn't really say anything different from what we've seen, but the point here, this is the Lancet. So the news is being broadcast now in the Lancet, 22nd of January 1983, under the heading Acquired Immunodeficiency Syndrome. At the very bottom of the page, there are at least 4 major populations at risk in the USA. About 75% of patients are homosexual males. If we scroll down, please, Paul. 13% are intravenous drug abusers with no history of homosexuality. 6% are Haitian immigrants who are not homosexual and do not abuse drugs. 0.7% are haemophiliacs. About 5% have no apparent risk factors. And then if we look down in the left-hand column towards the end of the second long paragraph, it says, finally, the syndrome may well be transmissible. Women may acquire AIDS from their male partners. and the disease has developed in haemophiliacs after factor VIII administration, in a child after blood transfusion, and in 4 infants whose mothers either had or were at risk of AIDS. Next paragraph, the overall mortality from AIDS is an alarming 40%, and in reality it may be considerably greater, since many patients who recover initially die subsequently from malignant disease or overwhelming infection. There are few reports of complete remission. That's picked up then in the New Scientist a few days later, PRSE 40726. So you may recall we looked at this article during the evidence of Andrew Evans last year when he had a recollection of his father seeing this. AIDS transfusion patients may be at risk. So this is the New Scientist for the 3rd of February 1983. American scientists are scouring the country for the first case of the bizarre new disease, AIDS, in patients who've undergone major surgery. And then skipping over a couple of paragraphs, it refers to a task force under Dr. Harold Jaffe at the CDC in Atlanta has found 7 cases of AIDS amongst haemophiliacs who do not fall into any of the other categories. Jaffe believes that the spread of the disease may be connected with new preparations of factor VIII concentrate, the blood clotting agent given to haemophiliacs, which are made up from blood from large numbers of donors rather than one individual. If this is correct, any patient in hospital who's given a blood transfusion could be at risk if one of the donors of the blood carries the virus. No cases of AIDS amongst British haemophiliacs have been reported so far, even though 50% of the factor VIII used in Britain comes from the US. Now, so shortly before that article, there was a meeting on the 24th of January 1983 at a London airport hotel. And we're going to look at 2 documents that relate to that meeting. The first is at RFLT 50 and then 50. So, thank you. So you'll see this is a letter being sent by Mr. Berry, the Managing Director of Immuno, to Dr. Kernoff, Co-Director of the Royal Free Hospital, the Haemophilia Centre at the Royal Free Hospital, and it's Dr. Kernoff who'd given, or sometime after this, gave that interview in the Haemophilia Society Bulletin. This is Mr. Berry sending a summary of discussions at the meeting held at the Excelsior Hotel, Heathrow Airport, on Monday, the 24th of January 1983. Now, we have 2 accounts of this meeting. This is Mr. Berry of Immuno's account. Again, this is a document we're highly likely to come back to a number of times over the coming months. We'll see at the top of the second page, summary of discussions of the meeting held at Excelsior Hotel, Heathrow Airport, Professor Bloom in the chair. And then there is a discussion, and I'm not going to go into the details of this part of the discussion, about non-A, non-B hepatitis. If we could go to the last page of this note, paragraph 13, this is the only reference to AIDS in this note, and it says this: the possibility of reducing the risk of AIDS was not known at this stage. In any case, it's not known if AIDS is caused by a virus or an attacker inimical to T cells. For a more detailed understanding of what discussions took place at that hotel meeting, we have to go to notes made, we think, by Dr. Bolton, and that is at PRSE 302647. Paul, could we go to the last page, first of all, so we can see the list of attendees? Those present included Dr. Evans, Manchester, Dr. Barrowcliff, Dr. Ritzer, Oxford, Dr. Hamilton, Newcastle, Dr. Ludlam, Edinburgh, Dr. Colvin, London Hospital, Professor Hardesty, we know from Great Ormond Street, Dr. Preston, Sheffield, I think I'm sure I'll get some of this wrong now that I've embarked upon it, Dr. Main, Belfast. We have Dr. Davidson, Dr. Arenstam, who was Trelaws, Dr. Hill, we know Birmingham, Dr. Edgecombe, Dr. Prentice, Dr. Savage, he was St Thomas's, Dr. Kernoff, Royal Free, Dr. Leslie, Dr. Winfield, Dr. Wensley, Dr. Mibashan, Dr. Krask, and then we have Professor Zuckerman, who we saw in the World in Action documentary, the hepatitis expert, Dr. Bloom, Dr. Shinton. The immuno team were led by Dr. Eibel. So it was a meeting involving a number of Haemophilia reference centre directors, others with a particular interest in hepatitis, and representatives of immuno. Again, I'm not going to deal with the discussion about non-A, non-B hepatitis. We'll come back to that at another time. But if we go to the previous page, please, Paul, we see a much more detailed account than we saw in Mr. Berry's note of the discussion that took place about AIDS at that January 83 meeting. Acquired immunodeficiency syndrome. This was discussed in the after-lunch period. Dr. Krass summarised the current position. He gave a clinical description of the AIDS syndrome. If we go down a couple of paragraphs, up to 10 December 1982, some 800 people had been reported as suffering from the AIDS, and there was a 45% mortality. 10 haemophiliacs in the US have been affected, and 5 have died. The youngest was aged 7. All cases have had prolonged treatment with factor VIII, but there is no specific implication of one particular product or batch. Other cases involving blood and blood product transmission have included platelets transfused in 3 cases. In one of these cases, one of the donors was a young New York man in his 20s. A second case was a 20-month-old child with rhesus HDN who had received several units, including platelets, known to have come from a homosexual donor who was asymptomatic at the time but who later died. That, again, is no doubt a reference to the San Francisco baby case. The child had developed autoimmune hemolytic anemia and a possible AIDS state. Over the page, the incubation period for the syndrome appears to be 6 months to 2 years. In the UK so far, only 1 or 2 cases have been reported from the Communicable Diseases Centre. The infectious precautions include discouraging homosexuals from donating blood or organs. Protocols from the US are being considered by the Hepatitis Working Party in the UK. Apparently, the American fractionation companies are very aware of the problem and are taking some unspecified measures to screen out such donors. The attention of the meeting was then drawn to the 2 articles on the editorial in the New England Journal of Medicine of 13th of January, which in summary indicates that the T4-T8 ratios among haemophiliacs receiving factor VIII is greater among those who've been exposed to concentrates than those exposed to cryoprecipitate only. However, cryoprecipitate in the US comes from volunteer unpaid donors and therefore are presumably well-motivated people. Final comments on the possible nature of the transmissible agents indicated that there may not be just one agent, but a mixture, i.e. a barrage of viruses, including hepatitis B, non-A, non-B, CMV, and many others, possibly transmitted from asymptomatic healthy blood donors. So a much more detailed account there of a discussion about current up-to-date information of numbers affected in the US. And again, so no doubt we'll come back with individual witnesses to their recollection and understanding of that meeting and its significance in terms of what was done or not done subsequently.
Is there anything else in that document which suggests anything other than some form of infectious agent or agents?
No, sir. So that was the 24th of January. The next reference centre director meeting of Haemophilia Centre directors was on the 14th of February, and we'll just briefly look at that, please. It's HCDO 40411. We go to the second page, please, Paul. We can see that these are draft minutes, but I don't think we have a final version. Minutes of the 16th meeting of Haemophilia Reference Centre directors held at the Royal Free Hospital on Monday, the 14th of February. And we see the names of those attending, almost all of whom had been at the London Airport meeting approximately 3 weeks before. If we look and see what was discussed about AIDS, it's the 5th page of the document, Paul. Thank you. 6 lines down, the AIDS syndrome, Professor Bloom said that the syndrome would be discussed at the Stockholm meeting of the World Federation of Haemophilia. Reports from the United States indicated that the incidence of AIDS was higher than at first thought, and there was some concern that the haemophiliac population of the UK who had received American concentrates might be at risk. Dr. Krask summarised the latest information from the United States, said that approximately 10 cases of AIDS were thought to have occurred in non-haemophiliacs in London, 1 in Glasgow and 1 in Manchester. Dr. Krask had drawn up a draft form for reporting of the cases. There was a lengthy discussion regarding the report form and which of the various documents which Dr. Krask had obtained from the United States should be circulated to the Haemophilia Centre directors. It was agreed that Dr. Krask should draw up a new form for the reporting of cases and to arrange for this to be circulated to all Haemophilia Centre directors with appropriate notes regarding the criteria on which the diagnosis should be based. It was suggested that Dr. Krask should invite an immunologist to join the hepatitis working party in view of the working party's involvement with the AIDS syndrome. But that's the extent of the discussion on the 14th of February. You'll see the action taken there as regards reporting and sharing of some information about diagnosis. There is no discussion recorded in the notes of any steps to be taken to inform patients of the risk, in contrast to what we see from the National Haemophilia Foundation in the States, and no discussion recorded in the notes about any changes or possible changes to treatment policies or approaches. Paul, if we could then please have PRSE 40546. This is now early March 1983, the 4th of March. It's another MMWR report from the CDC in the States. If we look at the third paragraph, the distribution of AIDS cases parallels that of hepatitis B virus infection, which is transmitted sexually and parenterally. Blood products or blood appear responsible for AIDS amongst haemophilia patients who require clotting factor replacement. The likelihood of blood transmission is supported by the occurrence of AIDS among IV drug abusers. And then reference to sharing of contaminated needles, to an infant developing severe immune deficiency and opportunistic infection, that's the San Francisco baby case again. The possibility of acquiring AIDS through blood components or blood is further suggested by several cases in persons with no known risk factors who've received blood products or blood within 3 years of AIDS diagnosis. These cases are currently under investigation. So again, picking up on one of your earlier observations, no suggestion of any other cause. And here, the term used is likelihood, not possibility of blood transmission. If we could go to the second page, please, Paul. Picking it up, 6 lines down. Furthermore, the California cluster investigation and other epidemiologic findings suggest a latent period of several months to 2 years between exposure and recognisable clinical illness, and imply that transmissibility may precede recognisable illness. So we're there in early March. There's some relevant communications in March between Bruce Everett in the States and Professor Bloom, but I'm going to deal with that when we look at Professor Bloom in Cardiff tomorrow. Could we then please, Paul, have PRSE 40728? This is a meeting on the 22nd of March 1983 in Scotland, meeting of the Haemophilia and Blood Transfusion Working Group. And we can see there the attendees include Dr. MacDonald, Dr. Cash, Dr. Forbes, Dr. Foster and Dr. Ludlam. If we turn, please, to the second page, bottom of the page, AIDS. Members were reminded of the recent articles, both at home and abroad, about AIDS. Dr. Ludlam reported that in the UK a letter and questionnaire had been sent out to haemophilia directors. That's no doubt a reference to Dr. Krask's proposals, which had been discussed at the February Reference Centre Directors meeting. AIDS was an emotive issue in the USA and Canada. and was causing a move away from the factor VIII concentrate to the use of cryoprecipitate with resultant supply problems. There was concern that AIDS might appear in the UK, and the Haemophilia Society was attempting to reassure its members and put fears of infection from blood products into perspective. Next page. The transfusion directors were loath to ask questions to which exception could be taken by potential donors, but it was hoped that homosexuals and others at risk might be discouraged from being donors. In the meantime, the transfusion directors were considering how best to ensure the safety of the plasma supply, and Dr. Forbes was conducting a sample study of the immunological status of haemophilia patients. The chairman agreed to keep the matter in view and bring it up for discussion at the next meeting. So, March 1983, there was an important decision in the States. Paul, could we have DHSC 0001203? This is the 24th of March 1983, a decision of the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration. This communication is from the Director, Office of Biologics, National Centre for Drugs and Biologics, to all licensed manufacturers of plasma derivatives. Extensive discussions amongst licensed manufacturers, the Office of Biologics and concerned groups such as the National Haemophilia Foundation have led to a consensus concerning an appropriate approach to decreasing the potential risk of transmitting AIDS by certain plasma derivatives. Plasma collected from donors suspected of being at increased risk of transmitting AIDS, and then they're then defined, should not be fractionated into derivatives already known to have a risk of transmitting infectious diseases. And then if we skip down to the next paragraph, we request that you immediately institute procedures with your plasma suppliers to assure that they've adopted appropriate donor screening practices and procedures. Now, how that edict from the FDA was then responded to and played out in this country, in particular in decision-making by the Department of Health and Social Security, will be something that we will explore in some detail with witnesses next year when we hear from government witnesses. And then if we could then have, and this I think is probably the last reference for today, it's 4 minutes or so from a documentary. So we're now in April of 1983, and a documentary, a Horizon documentary called Killer in the Village, was broadcast on the BBC on the 25th of April 1983. We only need a few minutes of it. Paul, it's BBC O 602, and the clip we want is from 39 minutes and 20 seconds into the programme.
A year after she left him, she developed a string of unusual infections. She was an hour late for this appointment with her doctor.
And how did you manage this week, Dolores? A little bit tired, as usual.
$39 minutes. No, that's the update. 39 minutes and 20 seconds.
An addict. A year after she left him, she developed a string of unusual infections. She was an hour late for this appointment with her doctor.
And how did you manage this week, Dolores?
A little bit tired, as usual. I haven't been...
Well, is this... Oh, I did. I'm sorry, I've given you the wrong reference. That's completely my fault, Paul. Sorry, there was an update a year later of this programme, and I've given you the reference to that. It's BBC O 604. And from 39 minutes and 20 seconds into that programme.
It's gay men and heroin addicts who may unwittingly have created the link to the next group. In 1982, several haemophiliacs died, and others, as yet unaffected, are worried. Steve Pasquale's haemophilia was diagnosed when he was 6 months old, but there was no treatment at all in those days, and his life was always in danger, particularly from internal bleeding. He received plasma from the age of 4. Then, at 10, a deep frozen precipitate from plasma that helped to clot his blood. It was always given under medical supervision. He was tied to the hospital. But 10 years ago, when Steve was 17, a new concentrate of the clotting agent called Factor VIII revolutionized his life because he could make it up himself when and where he needed it.
Thank you, Mercy.
But now it looks as though some has been contaminated. Must Steve now give this up? He does it all himself, timing the infusion according to an increase in stiffness in the joints. He'd come to expect a full and normal life. He consults specialist Shelby Dietrich.
Hello, Steve. How are you?
All right.
I would expect you've got some questions or feelings about this whole problem.
Yeah, it's a little, anxiety creating.
There are 20,000 haemophiliacs in America, and by this day, 10 or 11 cases of AIDS reported, and 5 deaths.
So they think it's in the factor.
Well, yes. The point is hemophiliacs absolutely have to be treated for their bleeding problems, and you know that. And I'm sure it raises all kinds of questions about what do I do now.
Whenever any of the hemophiliacs get together, it's a topic of conversation that always comes up. I think everybody's a little scared. Is this the infusion that's going to give it to me? I'm not ready to give up the benefits of concentrate yet.
But if there were a problem with this batch, could it be traced back to its source?
Each lot of these clotting concentrates is pooled from over 2,500 donors each, so that hemophiliacs are exposed to literally tens of thousands of donors per year. Tracking all of these donors back from a case is virtually impossible.
How can we be sure that all blood products are safe? Stop gay men giving blood? Gay leaders say that's unacceptable. Everyone should have the same rights and the same obligations to society. In New York, volunteer donors are asked questions that should reveal some of the symptoms of AIDS.
Okay, have you lost a lot of weight recently?
No.
Have you been exposed to any infectious diseases that you know of in the past 3 weeks?
No.
Okay.
And there's an inspection for intravenous drug use.
Okay, thank you.
But is this enough? In principle, a further possibility would be to screen the blood's helper-suppressor ratios, as it's tested here automatically for blood groups. But it would be expensive and would take time to develop. The contamination of blood and its products is not just an American problem. Half the factor VIII used in Britain comes from the United States. And just how far can AIDS spread beyond the 4 main high-risk groups?
So that, as I say, was broadcast on BBC, I don't know if it was BBC One or BBC Two, 25th of April, 1983. And that is probably the right point at which to stop for the day.
But not bad timing. So thank you for that.
Perfect plan, sir.
And we continue tomorrow. So we start at 10 o'clock, do we?
Yes. We'll finish this presentation on knowledge of risk and then turn to look at certain materials relevant to Professor Bloom and the Cardiff Haemophilia Centre. There is a very long, detailed note in relation to that, which has been shared with core participants and their legal representatives, and I won't be going through the detail of it. It'll be a question of looking at some of the particularly key decisions and actions of Professor Bloom and the potential implications of those decisions and actions.
Yes, thank you very much. Until tomorrow then, and stay safe.